Hey guys, and welcome to the newest episode of Be Hero Presents the Bump Card Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, Brian, and with me tonight is my tag partner, Psycho. How you doing tonight, Psycho?
I'm good. It's my birthday week, depending on when you're listening to this. Oh, a spoiler out of the bag.
Well,
I just ruined everything.
This will be a week behind at least because I was super sick over the week of the 17th or whatever, 17th to the 23rd, somewhere in that range. I was super sick, so I didn't edit or any of this stuff and didn't drop the episodes. So you guys missed a week. So last week, you guys got to hear our episode on... What did we talk about last week?
Dream matches, wasn't it?
Dream matches, yes. Now, this week, we're actually going to talk about something that I obviously need because I can't think. I'm not in the right mode to talk, so I'm still feeling not great. I need me a good mouthpiece, sir. I need a manager. Not just a manager, but the best managers. So we're going to talk about who are the best managers in wrestling, not just current, but of all time. And also what makes a good manager.
Yeah, and I feel like I have a little bit of knowledge in this subject because I became a manager for the last few years.
Yeah.
And I've managed before in the past too. I was the first manager of Greatness. That's how that whole thing formed. Although I know that you have bad memories of that time period because I came back to join Greatness, I think by screwing you out of the junior heavyweight title. But
sounds about right.
But what makes a great manager? I think for me, it's obviously you have to be a good talker.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be able to cut a promo. At least that's on my list of what makes a good manager. Obviously, there's managers out there that don't talk, but they really have to have a special gimmick if that's the case. Something to add something to a wrestler. If they're just kind of out there, I don't think that really adds anything.
Yeah.
In some cases, it could actually take away from the act and actually not be a good pairing. I feel like, so definitely being a good talker. I feel like also if you're a heel manager, being able to generate heat, but not put it on yourself per se, but being able to transfer that heat onto your wrestlers and get them more over that you're managing. Or by the same token, a babyface manager, maybe by adding something that gets the babyface wrestler more over, and maybe even somebody that the heels could kind of antagonize or something to add to the package. What are your thoughts on what makes a good wrestling manager?
Kind of in the same boat. Of course, the best kind of managers are enhancements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have your worker, and your worker may not be, say, The Rock, right? The Rock's got a lot of the great bits you need to have an all-time great wrestler, or like Stone Cold Steve Austin. But you get managers like or you get workers like Brock Lesnar or Bobby Lashley or somebody in that vein who is lacking in an aspect, is really good in certain things, but is lacking the aspect, and a manager can fill that role to bring them up, right? One that you don't think about a lot that might be lacking, and they need to have a manager to be able to build that, is Macho Man, right? Macho Man had very flamboyant, great in the ring, was able to talk really well on the mic and everything else, but he wasn't really likable as a face. And Miss Elizabeth gave him that. The thing he was lacking was the ability to be likable, to be a babyface. And Miss Elizabeth's sweet wholesomeness gave him that.
I also think, okay, we'll start with Miss Elizabeth here. Okay. because I definitely think she added so much to the package that was the Macho Man Randy Savage and his character. But I actually think she helped him be a better heel. And here's the thing: not because she was a heel manager,
No.
because she wasn't. Right, not till later when she went to WCW, and that's something else.
Yeah.
But because he treated her badly, it got him more heat, and people just loved Elizabeth so much that her being out there and being treated badly by Macho Man Randy Savage, that was a great act at the time.
Oh yeah.
And it led to Randy Savage, having the angle that would lead him to the WWF Championship, and then the feud with Hulk Hogan over Elizabeth, and all of that. So Elizabeth, it's interesting because Elizabeth is somebody that when you say like great manager, was she a great manager? And I'm kind of torn on this. On one hand, I'm like, well, it really only worked with Macho Man Randy Savage, but in WCW, she eventually, when she was a heel, she ended up managing Ric Flair, Lex Luger.
Well, she managed Hogan during the Mega Powers.
That's true.
So
And so she did manage some other people, and that kind of brings up a good point of somebody like Elizabeth was unique to their situation, right?
Yep.
Somebody else that fits into that same mold is like a Paul Bearer, right? Paul Bearer didn't really manage a lot of people.
3 off the top of my head I can think of.
I can think of 3 too.
Yeah.
So you got The Undertaker,
of course,
right? Who he's most known for.
Yeah.
And then later when he turned heel and took off the makeup, so to speak, he managed Mankind,
Yep.
and he managed Kane.
Yep.
And that's pretty much it. Was Paul Bearer a great manager, or was he just the perfect fit for that story and those wrestlers? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, with Paul Bearer, I think he was a great manager because of what he can do with his own gimmick to enhance the gimmicks he was with, right? Look at him as Percy Pringle when he was in NWA before he made the WWE, and he was who was the tag team he was managing? I can't remember, but he was doing a heel gimmick at the time. Bleach blonde hair, still the same look, but he was kind of doing like a rich man gimmick almost. Like he owned these other guys and got them to work for him, kind of thing. And he still owned that gimmick too. Like he did really well with what he was doing with it. So I think Paul Bearer, I think he knocked out of the park with Paul Bearer. And so you never had to really see him do anything else. But I think that talks to how well he did. And you have to think, without Paul Bearer, how big would Kane have been? I mean, Kane literally was initially designed as a single storyline run character that blew up. Also, speaking of Kane, boom, Kane.
Those listening cannot see what he just held up.
So a dear friend of mine gave my girls a bunch of his old daughter's Barbies and like Barbie set and stuff like that. And there happened to be a Kane action figure that was in the box and it's now sitting at my desk. So it's like perfect timing to talk about it.
So I agree, because think about this. Not just Kane, because Kane wouldn't have been the same without heel Paul Bearer.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like old school Undertaker wouldn't have been the same without Paul Bearer either. That was kind of a package deal there. Yes, when Undertaker debuted, he had Brother Love bring him out to the ring for his Survivor Series debut. But that was kind of an odd pairing. When Paul Bearer managed him, almost immediately right after, it was, dare I say, a match made in heaven, match made in hell, however you want to say that.
It was a match made in McMahon's head, so it kind of falls between both too. So.
And Paul Bearer was a real life mortician.
Yeah.
And so he ran a funeral parlor. So it was perfect for him, and he probably added a lot to it with ideas because that was his shoot job, so to speak, right? I think Paul Bearer also added a lot to the Mankind character.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, Mankind, when he debuted, he didn't have a manager, and he was there for several months before Paul Bearer joined him. But Paul Bearer really added a lot to the Mankind character. Hey, I was just thinking of something. Paul Bearer also managed Vader. Do you remember that?
No.
He managed Vader right about the time that it was during the Mankind skit, and it was because they teamed together, Mankind and Vader, for the tag titles at WrestleMania 13, I want to say. And Paul Bearer was managing Vader against the Undertaker.
Well, something that's interesting too with Paul Bearer, and there's some other people we can talk about later, as well in the manager thing, is along with enhancing workers, is being able to get the rub from having that as your manager, right? Some of the greats that they're these great managers who have managed these other people and have gotten the rub from those events that they were with those guys, that Paul or people like Paul Bearer were able to add it on. So you go years managing Taker, right? And then you're no longer managing Taker, but now you come out against Taker as the face with Kane or Mankind or Vader, apparently. And you get that instant rub. It's like, oh, this Paul Bearer knows, who to work with. Paul Bearer knows who's the best person to go up against his guy. So that just adds credibility to these guys they're bringing out, right? So, I mean, think about the great line from JR when Kane first comes out, right? During, was it Hell in a Cell?
It was Bad Blood.
Bad Blood, yep.
Yep, which was the first Hell in a Cell match.
But comes out during that match, and you hear JR saying, he's coming out with Paul Bearer. That's gotta be Kane. Or was that McMahon?
It was McMahon.
That was McMahon. That's right. As I was doing the voice, I realized, oh wait, that wasn't JR. It was again. So
that's gotta be Kane. Yep, Jim Ross was out there for that.
Yeah,
but yes, that was the famous Vince McMahon call, which was so funny. It's so imitatable, but you've got it burned in your head.
I do, because it is, and that large to do is with Paul Bearer. If a guy just comes down to the ring, it could be anybody. You have no investment in it. But if you come down with a great manager, it adds more investment to those guys.
Yeah. We talked about Miss Elizabeth, and I also, when I think Miss Elizabeth, I also think of somebody like a Sensational Sherry, right? Because that was somebody that, she was a women's wrestler, and then she got paired up with Macho Man Randy Savage against Elizabeth, feuding against. So many of these managers, it's a nice transition when, like, Randy Savage, broke off from Elizabeth, so he brings in Sensational Sherry, and now there's a foil for Miss Elizabeth, right? Or vice versa, I guess. Whatever. And Sensational Sherry was brilliant as the Macho Man's manager, until she dumped him, and then as the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase.
Yeah.
And then she left him for Shawn Michaels. Yeah. Right? All of those, and then in WCW she managed Harlem Heat, and then I forget who else she managed, Ric Flair in WCW. So she managed so many, and she was different though, because unlike a Miss Elizabeth, Sensational Sherry or Sister Sherry or Queen Sherry, whatever you want to call, whatever iteration she was going by, she was not afraid to get down and dirty.
Yeah,
I mean, what's that?
I was gonna say, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Yep. That, like, against somebody like Miss Elizabeth or even Paul Bearer, like, she wasn't afraid to get in the ring and attack people with the people behind, or get involved more. She
Mm-hmm.
also had a lot better ability of working with the crowd on the
Mm-hmm.
outside to get heat while everything was going on. And um, Miss Elizabeth had like the sympathy feel as a face
Yeah.
manager. Paul had like kind of a two-dimensional ish like character that he had going with his facial features and everything else. But Miss Sherry, Sensational Sherry, she had the ability of having all these emotions going on, and like she was angry and she was like jumping up and down. She was so surprised. Like when you were
Mm-hmm.
watching a match that she was managing, you were watching a worker doing her
Yeah.
thing more than just essentially a valet.
Yeah. She was above and beyond a valet because she wasn't really eye candy. I mean, not saying she wasn't an attractive woman, but at the same time, like, um, I got to pivot here very quickly with that. So, she was somebody that she could like hit a male wrestler, and the male wrestler, what's he going to do? He can't really attack her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he might like hesitate, and then her heel man or her heel wrestler that she's managing could get the upper hand as a distraction or something like that, and the fans would jump all over because like the wrestlers that she managed would sometimes like put her in front of them, and it was a very different dynamic
Yep.
that was there. Um, Speaking of somebody that had while she was out there, she had a very screechy voice, right? That kind of added to it. Somebody else that had a voice that kind of was one of those where you're like, "Will somebody please shut them up?" The Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart.
Yep.
This was somebody that not just their voice, but they had that he had that megaphone that he'd have ringside, just so not just his annoying voice, but he amplified it with the megaphone so you couldn't get away from it. And he's blasting that thing the whole match, regardless of who he managed, whether it was the Nasty Boys or the Mountie or King Kong Bundy. He managed so many
Oh
people.
yeah.
I think he managed like Dino Bravo. There were so many guys he managed that the Natural Disasters, and he would just Money Incorporated. I could go on and on because he's managed so many, but he added something because no matter who he managed, they had instant heat.
Yep.
Just by him being in their corner, it doesn't matter if they were liked before. If Jimmy Hart's managing them, no, we got to get somebody to shut him up. If we have to go through those guys that he's managing, so be it. That's kind of the something extra that he would bring is you could take a nobody that nobody cares about and put him with Jimmy Hart, and instantly they can contend for titles because they've got that heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Jimmy, it's exactly like you said. Like he was able to bring the heat and was able to do it in such a natural way that you only wanted to see him get his ass kicked, but his guy he came out with get their ass kicked because of such, right? It's like having those two guys on in the schoolyard, right? The one that runs its mouth the whole time, and then when it's time to fight, he runs behind his like older friend who's the bully, and the bully's the one that does all the fighting, but the younger one's talking all the crap. The one younger one talking all the crap was Jimmy Hart, and everybody had that idea in their head, that way to be relevant to them, right? Because everyone knows that dynamic, and so it was so easy to dislike him and anybody that came out with him because they could see that he was the little yappy dog that came out with the big bulldog that you had to fight through to get to the yappy dog.
And I almost forgot that he managed the Honky Tonk Man. That was probably the best pairing ever because Honky Tonk Man he had heat all by himself.
Yep.
But you have Jimmy Hart out there with his megaphone at the same time. Nuclear Heat. They could main event shows, and they did. Um, you know what I don't think quite worked though? When Jimmy Hart when he was a babyface manager and he ended up like managing Hulk Hogan. I just feel like Hogan didn't need him, right? And babyface really wasn't his Jimmy Hart's forte. He was basically just out there, but he couldn't talk a lot because it would get heat to his babyface wrestler, whether it be Hogan or, gosh, I don't even remember anybody else he managed as a babyface. Brutus Beefcake, I guess, when they were the Megamaniacs.
He did an intro for Hall of Fame in the last couple of years. I'm trying to remember who it was, and he did his whole shtick, but he had to do it in such a light way comparison to it because he could have easily gotten heat at a Hall of Fame because that's just how good Jimmy was naturally. You just naturally want to punch Jimmy Hart in the face. Like, if I met him in person, I think I would hug him and then punch him in the face.
And the funny thing about Jimmy Hart is that what you see on TV, that's really him. Like, it's just turned up, but like, he really talks that way. Like, he really, I don't know if you watched Legends House. It was a show that was on the network when it first came out and whatnot. And great show if you haven't watched it. If you like reality shows, it was great. If you like old school wrestling, it was great. They put a bunch of these old school personalities, Jimmy Hart, Roddy Piper, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, I think, or Hillbilly Jim, a lot of these guys, and they put them in a house basically and did different put them in different scenarios and really just pissed them all off to where they were like fighting with each other and everything. But Jimmy Hart, same guy, right? He didn't that's just Jimmy. And so it's funny because we talked about how good a heel he is and how he's not a good babyface manager, but at the same time, like listening to Jimmy Hart just like talk and tell stories, you can't help but like love the guy. I don't know.
That's where the hugging part comes
dynamic.
from.
Yeah,
you want to hug him and then like you want to punch him in the face. So,
and Jimmy Hart is somebody that I swear does not age. He looks exactly the same and has just as much energy now as he did, 25 years ago. It's crazy.
I know, it's like he shot up to like 45 and then just stayed there.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
But yeah,
another person that go ahead.
I was gonna say there's been so many great managers, but we've talked mostly like 80s managers. Mind you, that was kind of like the 80s and 90s was like the time of the managers. Do we have any managers current, or do you want to talk about one that we haven't talked about yet?
There's plenty.
Well, I mean, from the 80s, 90s specifically, because there's one that's popping in my head, and we've had the opportunity of meeting them.
For a manager?
Yep.
From the 80s or 90s?
Yep.
I'm trying to think of who you're talking about. Because there's some that pop in my head from the 80s or 90s that are huge that we have to talk about.
Oh yeah. And again, that was a time of managers, honestly, like 80s and 90s.
It really was. It's kind of a lost art now.
Yeah.
Because like really, when you think of, we could talk a little bit of current manager, before, and then we could.
Like the big one that's in my head right now, and I'm sure it's the one you're thinking of too. I want to save towards the last.
Okay. I feel like right now, it's really Paul Heyman is probably the best example of a manager currently. That's been around since the 90s.
Well, again, let's talk about him towards the end.
Okay, is that who you were talking about?
That's who I was talking about.
Okay, well, let's talk about somebody that was big in the 80s and 90s that was not apparently in your head, but Bobby the Brain Heenan.
He was on my list as well, but he wasn't the one I was thinking about. But we can come up to them in a minute. How could you not love the Weasel?
Yeah, I mean, so many memorable lines. First as a manager, then as a commentator. Like honestly, from top to bottom, probably added the most to wrestling. Oh, I mean, try to find somebody else that added as much, over the years as Bobby the Brain Heenan. When you put him on your television, no matter what the capacity, you're going to get entertaining television. Or as a host of one of their weekly television shows, or it's primetime wrestling, or All American Wrestling, or WWF Superstars. I mean, you name it. Bobby the Brain Heenan was somebody interesting that, again, somebody like a Jimmy Hart, where you put anybody with him and they're instantly a main eventer. Whether it be Andre the Giant. I mean, Andre didn't need Bobby Heenan, but I think Bobby Heenan was instrumental, though, in people hating Andre the Giant because he was so beloved for so long. I don't know the heel turn against Hulk Hogan, leading up to WrestleMania 3. I don't know if it works without somebody like a Bobby the Brain Heenan that had that heat to kind of get people to hate him and put him up against Hogan. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say Bobby's, like, especially with that one, like you look at the way he worked, you could almost turn like your biggest baby face, right? You could turn somebody like a Hogan or Cena, or even like if he was around now, like you could turn a Rey Mysterio, the ultimate baby face, with Bobby as there. And the way it would be pitched is that Bobby has done something, that Bobby brainwashed so and so to be a bad guy. Not that the person wanted to be a bad guy, not the person wanted, like, is a bad person. They are a great person, but Bobby turned them, right? And that's how good he was.
And, Gorilla Monsoon would always be, talking about, like, what are you filling his head with, and all of that when he would get paired with somebody. It's like, and it was great. And, I think in a future episode, we'll have to talk about, like, announcers, but, because they add so much too. But Bobby, like, you could pair him with somebody like gosh, I'm trying to think of somebody like in the Brainbusters, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, or somebody that they're great wrestlers, but maybe they need something extra on the mic, or a Haku who never spoke, or a Barbarian. And instantly those guys were credible because you had Bobby the Brain Heenan in their corner, whereas otherwise they'd be mid-carders, right? And he could take them in their main eventing Survivor Series against Hogan, on the opposite side of Hogan, just being part of the Heenan family. And then he fit perfectly with somebody like Mr. Perfect. I did not even mean to make that pun. And I kid you not, I was thinking Mr. Perfect, and I was like, he worked perfectly with, and I was like, oh, this is funny.
It was a perfect pun.
It was. But that was perfect. Gosh, there goes that word. But Bobby the Brain Heenan was just great, and he could take bumps.
Yeah.
So, he's always getting beat up by a big boss man or a Hulk Hogan or a Warrior, sadly for him, because Warrior just abused him. But he was always in there to, the heel could run off and still keep his heat, and Bobby the Brain Heenan would take the beating. And then with his whole weasel thing, like, he famously, dressed up in a weasel suit and wrestled the Ultimate Warrior and different things like that. So he was not afraid to be the butt of the jokes.
And he never took himself seriously.
No. He just always had the one-liners, and he just added so much to anybody he was paired with. I honestly, like, if I have to say the greatest of all time, Bobby Heenan's gotta be up there. If he's not one, he's two, or he's 1A,
like,
or 1B.
I would definitely put Bobby up there because, again, you could pair him with anybody. Like I said, like Rey Mysterio, like the ultimate underdog, like the perfect baby face is Rey Mysterio, And I could see him being able to do a heel run with Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Yeah, and then here's another one that kind of fits in there, but Jim Cornette. There's somebody if you watched him in WCW or later on in the WWF, he was somebody that you just wanted to punch in his face.
Yeah.
That I mean, if you really listen to like his podcast and listen to his interviews now, he's not any different. He's the same guy. His manager personality, not any different than what he talks about throughout his podcast and stuff. It's just talking about different things.
Yeah, I would put him in that same boat as Jimmy Hart, where he's kind of himself turned up a bit. Similarly, like, and this will be, if he ever listens to this, he'll be great to hear this, is a manager we have at DCW's, MK. MK Robles. He is very much in that same vein as Jimmy Hart, where he can gain heat so much. Or not Jimmy Hart. My brain just turned off on the guy we were just talking about.
Jim Cornette?
Jim Cornette. I kept wanting to say Crockett. I'm like, that's not right. But Cornette, like MK Bandit, he's very much in that same boat as Cornette, where they get in there, doesn't matter who they're with, he can talk the crap, and that's kind of like who he is really. You just want to punch him in the face. Sadly, similarly, they go a little bit farther into wanting to get the heat, where they almost take away from the person they're working with, which is one of the downsides to Cornette as well as MK.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cornette though was, when he was paired with the Midnight Express, or he was paired with somebody, let's say a Yokozuna or Owen Hart in the British Bulldog, he did fit with them though. And so here's one that kind of, I think, was a good manager, but it also kind of fits into kind of the situation he was in, was JJ Dillon, the manager of the Four Horsemen.
Oh yeah,
way back when,
which was interesting. We got to meet him years ago. You remember that?
Yes, at Cauliflower Alley Club.
Yeah. Really nice guy.
Super nice guy. He's somebody that, outside of the Horsemen, though, I can't tell you anybody else he managed if he did.
Yeah, I can't think of either.
It was really the Horsemen, and which, very prestigious spot.
Yeah.
Almost like a Paul Bearer managing The Undertaker for years and years, where he was just in that situation. But
he did a couple different iterations of the Horsemen, if I remember right.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, it was several, right? But JJ Dillon was perfect in that spot, but he could talk, but he didn't need to talk, because you had talkers like Arn Anderson or Ric Flair or Tully Blanchard in that group. But he was also somebody kind of like a Bobby the Brain Heenan, that he could get in there and get his butt kicked,
Yeah.
And he did. He competed in War Games along with his Horsemen. And then you could talk about somebody like
Sonny, by the way, was the one I was thinking of earlier, who we met.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, who was 90s 90s manager and stuff like that. Kind of the OG good-looking female manager, like the I wouldn't say slutty, but like eye-catching, like jaw-dropping female manager, the TNA manager.
Because we talked about Elizabeth, but Elizabeth was stunning in she was a lady, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, and
she's the kind of girl you want to bring home to your mom.
Right. She was very
Sonny
classy.
was definitely not. Sonny was the girl you want to bring to your backseat of your car.
There's a great quote, and I gotta be able to say it how, like, I want to try to say it without actually saying it, since, so we don't have to bleep it out. But Jim Cornette used to say Sonny was a B word, but she'd be a B word to your face.
Yeah.
Like, so, and he might have even used like a more harsh word than that, but But Sunny was somebody that it was interesting because she got the heat and everything, but she was like really the first one, dare I say, like she got heat from the women because she was gorgeous, and they would get mad because their boyfriends were looking at her, right? But then you also had the guys would dislike her because they knew that she would never give them the time of the day,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Well, it's that old saying. It's like women want to be here, men want to be with her kind of scenario.
yeah.
So
I know for me, like she was one of the first ones for me that I was just like, wow. And I actually,
I hope
yeah,
you did
I
not
saw
tell her
her.
that when we met her.
No, you brought me into puberty. You know that, son? No, just no. And
High
and
five.
right. I want to shake your hand. um, Sonny's
I've told that
actually.
story on here before, right? When we met her and I went to shake her hand.
Oh, tell the story. I don't
Okay,
know if you have.
so she came out to work a show with us many, many, many years ago. And in wrestling, for those who don't know, as a worker, you always want to go up and shake everyone's hand that you meet and introduce yourself. Even if you've done it before, like introduce yourself before, you always want to introduce yourself again and stuff like that. So I go up to meet Sunny, and I already, because Rhino was also on the show. I met Rhino and introduced myself. And shortly after that, I went to go meet Sunny. And I went to go introduce myself. I'm like, hey, my name's Mike, because I always introduce myself as my gimmick name. And I put my hand out, and she looks down at my hand, looks up at me, and goes, "Is that clean?" And I looked at her. Yeah, it's clean. I was very confused for why she said that. Then she took my hand and shook it, but it was just the most odd interaction I've ever had with anybody in the business.
Well, probably not as odd as the interaction she had with Ricky Ridlin. Do you remember this?
Yeah, yes, I do.
So I wasn't around. I just heard this. I mean, I was there, but I wasn't. I wasn't there for this interaction. But I guess Ricky Ridlin, who's a Utah wrestler from way back when, and he went up to Sunny, and I guess he had was it her DVD,
Something like that.
something like that, or maybe it was a magazine, I forget, but that she had posed in, right? It was something, I think Vivid did the video, and it was softcore,
Yeah.
and she flipped out at him because he came up to her and said, "Can you sign this?" And she flipped out at him and just went off on him. I wish I could have been there to see this. I did you like see it, or did you hear about it?
I was in the back. I was not close enough to see what was going on at the time. I did see her flip out at him. She throws the DVD at him because he handed it to her. Like she physically took it and then looked and saw what it was, and she hurls it at him and just starts yelling at him, talking about how it was inappropriate. Which, in her defense, it
Right.
is. Ricky does not understand the word of tactful. I
Right.
don't think that's even in his vocabulary. So, but yeah, she lost her mind on it, and it makes me now think that I'm very happy I went and shook her hand before that incident happened. So,
Right.
yeah. Anyhow, back on the managers.
Can I wait? One more Sunny story
Okay.
on this, because did you hear about what happened with Centron after the show with Sunny?
Mm-mm.
So Centron, Utah based wrestler as well, that you used to wrestle for UCW Zero, and so I guess they were at the bar after the show, because a lot of the UCW guys came to the show like they usually did, to especially when there was a star or somebody they wanted to meet or
Yeah.
whatever, right? And so after the show, I guess they were at some bar, and Sunny was there, and Cinchon like was talking with her or whatnot. And this is by multiple accounts. Sunny came on to Centron and like invited him back up to her room. Allegedly, this is, but several people have told me this that were there. And Cintron turned her down, and there were wrestlers that were like, "Are you crazy?" It's like, and he basically like made it seem like he was above her, or that she was, not a, dare I say, not a classy woman. I don't know, but and she got upset at him for rejecting her. And I wish I could have been there for the Ricky Ridlin thing and the Cintron thing. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for both of those encounters.
Save the thought that I'm married, right? If I was single, knowing all of her past or rumored past and everything else, I would still totally do it for the sheer fact that I could say that I was able to tap that, right?
Yeah, even Sunny at that point, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't like prime Sunny.
No.
But at that point, she still wasn't what she would become now.
Yeah.
Right? But she still was a good-looking woman. So, yes. Yeah, I won't go into anything else on that, but interesting stories with Sunny.
Yep.
That we got to be around and hear about.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead, name it. Do you have another one on your end?
I'm trying to think. Like, there's tons of managers from back in the day that people remember. We brought up like Brother Love earlier, right? And
Brother Love was really more a talk show host though than a manager. Like, I think he only did the Undertaker thing. Like, he really didn't manage anybody else.
Well, there's also Mr. Fuji.
Mr. Fuji was a good one because, like, Mr. Fuji was somebody that, I don't know, he was just...
And he was a worker too.
Yeah, absolutely. He was former WWF Tag Team Champion.
Yeah.
And so he could work. And he was just somebody that was very devious, almost like he was out of like a James Bond movie.
Yeah, which
right?
I think exactly the gimmick he was trying to portray.
Yeah, because he had his little top hat and his cane, and like he looked like an odd job, from James Bond. That's what he looked like to me.
Yeah. I would even go as far as calling Ted DiBiase, especially towards the later end of his career, as a manager. Like with Steve Austin when he came in. There's a lot of really good ones. But I would say probably my favorite all-time manager is Paul Heyman.
And that's a good one. I mean, if you really think about for longevity, what other manager has there been that managed in the... Gosh, when did he start managing?
It would have been late 80s because it was Paulie Dangerously.
Yeah, well, I know it was early 90s, but I think it was like 89, 88, somewhere in there. Right? So you had him early 90s, late 90s, even when he was running he ran ECW. But then he transitioned over to WWF in the 2000s. When he first started managing Brock Lesnar, and then Rob Van Dam and a lot of those guys, and then and then to now, like, and he managed CM Punk. You didn't think we'd get through a show without talking about Punk, did you?
I was hoping we were going to go at least
I don't think we're going to talk about Punk on a manager show, but there you go. Oh, but he managed Punk, by the way, when he held one of the longest running championship reigns in history for the WWF Championship. So, just putting that there.
But the great thing about Paulie is he is able to not just be a mouthpiece, but a reactional device, right? Mm-hmm. You see the stuff that he did with Brock Lesnar. He would talk for Brock when Brock needed him, but when Brock would do something in the ring, he would get all excited or freak out. You look at the shock face he has at WrestleMania when Brock beats Taker, right? That shock face, like, oh my gosh, I didn't think he was actually going to do it. Boom. Watch.
And that made that moment too.
It did. It totally did. You watch almost every promo that, especially the backstage promos that they have with the Bloodline, with Paul Heyman in the background. half the fun is watching Paul Heyman's face in the background.
It is just he reacts to everything.
Yeah.
Like he listens and he reacts accordingly. Like I don't think the bloodline would be as big without Paul Heyman in that equation.
No, I don't think so either. And one of the other great things about Paul Heyman is because of his ability of really working, like not so much in the ring, but just working in general. Because he does all of the backstage skits, he does all of the stuff out in the ring, he does all the stuff outside of the ring and everything else. He fills the missing gaps of any person he's working with, right? So Punk didn't need him to cut promos at all, but he was there to help Punk on the outside and
he added to that heat.
Yeah, exactly. What he's doing with the bloodline. Roman definitely doesn't need him to cut promos, but what he does do for Roman is he allows Roman to not have to be there, right? There's so many times where Paul has been the reactionary force to somebody calling out Roman in the ring, and he comes out there and goes, this is what Roman said, this is what we're going to do, boom, boom, boom. Or even in the backstage vignettes when he's talking to the Usos or Solo and Roman's not there, boom. But he does it in such a way where you feel like this is exactly where it's coming from, is from Roman. Like he just got off the phone with him. You feel that. Like he doesn't need to have his presence being Roman there. Paul takes that presence and he fits that role so perfectly. But one of my favorite things about Paul Heyman is his promo skills. I think bar none, I can't think of another person who has the better promo skills than Paul Heyman, manager or otherwise. Because Paul has a great way of bringing you along in a story, in a thing, right? Think of the promos building up to this most recent WrestleMania with Cody Rhodes, right? Talking about Cody's dad and stuff like that, and because they were friends, and having this heart-to-heart with Cody, and you can tell they did this whole promo essentially on the fly. Like there was no rehearsing this promo; it wasn't written for them. This was from the heart promo, but they hit it so perfectly and told these beats so well. Another one was going into WrestleMania. I think it was WrestleMania 33. It was Brock and Roman, and Paul is there in replacement for Brock because Brock's not there. Paul's cutting a promo with Roman in the ring, and instead of tearing him down, talking about how Brock's going to beat the crap out of him and everything, Paul looks them dead in the face and goes, "Look, you are too big, you're fast, you can do this, you can do that, you're going to win these titles, you're going to be amazing. And if I wasn't with Brock, I would be with you. If Brock wasn't here, you would be the guy. But sadly, Brock is here, and you just can't beat him." Like that whole promo he built to it, and I can't even do it justice, right? That's just like a quick summary of that promo. But that promo was so good, like you felt it. You felt this promo he was telling, because the best promos you're going to have are ones that build the person up. And then you say, but you still can't do it because I'm not much better.
A perfect example is the one that Paul Heyman had with Cody Rhodes.
Yeah.
Right, where he talked about how your father, you were the son that, gosh, I can't even remember it, but it was so good.
Do you remember? You're his favorite son.
Yes.
But Roman's the son he always wanted.
Yeah, the one he always wanted. Yeah, it was so good. Like you said, it's perfectly building him up just to bring him right back down to earth and get that heat, right? That zinger at the end. So good. You know what my favorite Paul Heyman story my favorite Paul Heyman moment, or one of them anyway, is actually very early Paulie Dangerously. And one of my first exposures to him. And it was my first WCW pay-per-view that I ever bought. My first pay-per-view I ever bought, period. I want to say. No, sorry, my second. But my first WCW one I ever bought.
Okay.
Halloween Havoc 1992. And Paulie Dangerously was out there talking. Vader was out there with Harley Race. There's another good one, by the way. But was out there talking, and Medusa was out there. And Medusa was in like Rick Rude's corner, and she was kind of almost like a mercenary for the Dangerous Alliance.
Mhm.
And Medusa shoves Paul Heyman's cutting a promo, right? Medusa shoves like Paul Heyman, just kind of like takes over the promo and starts talking or whatever. And Paul Heyman, Paulie Dangerously, it's like, I have had it with you. It's like, and basically fires her and was like, you're fired. And she's like, what? And he's like, oh, do I need to speak slowly? Let me spell it out for you. Whoa, man. And she just berates her as a woman and everything. It's like, and then shoves her shoulder and she kicks him, and they have to be like pulled off of each other. Go watch this moment if you have never seen it. It is amazing. It instantly made me a WCW like fan because of Paul Heyman, because of Paulie Dangerously. I loved it so much. It was just pure drama, and it was like so like what a dick. Like it was awesome, and I got a lot of my heelish tendencies from Paul Heyman. If I'm being honest.
I'm very much the same. My promo skills, I've learned a ton from while listening and watching Paul Heyman and trying to mimic him. And like, in training, we're always talking to the guys about trying to not steal directly from, but like to get a couple of guys to be like your influenced by people, like people you're influenced by. Yeah. And Paul Heyman, especially for my CEO gimmick, is definitely been one of those people who I try to mimic a lot of his mannerisms and the way his speech pattern is and the way he cuts a promo, because it's so well done. And any worker out there right now, if you're listening, like Paul Heyman is probably the best person to learn how to cut a promo from, because he does it in a great way. Mike Quackenbush wrote a book called The 7 Steps to Being a Wrestler. And in it, he talks about promo skills and goes off and starts talking about some of the best people who do promo skills are the people who learn how to build up the person you're working against, right? Because, let's say that you come in and you're like, I don't know who you are. You're a piece of crap, boom, 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 boom. And then where do you go from there? If you lose to them, you lost to an unknown person. What kind of person does that make you?
A nobody, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you beat them, who'd you beat? A nobody, right? But if you go off and then build them up, like Paul Heyman does with his promos, if you build these people up, you are you're so good at this, you're so amazing, you're so fast, you've won all these titles, boom, 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 boom. But I'm still going to beat you because of reason ABC.
Right.
As a heel, I'm going to beat you because you just can't touch me. I'm not good. As a face, you're like, even with all of that, I'm still going to win because I have a bigger heart kind of story. Like, those are the stories you want to go with. And Quackenbush talks about it, and it's exactly what Paul Heyman does. It is some of the best promos you're going to ever learn how to do is by listening and mimicking what Paul Heyman does. And don't get me wrong, like Jake the Snake Roberts, also great on the promos for the similar reason, because he does his promo stories in the same way. But
also somebody that influenced me with promos that I stole directly from him.
I know. You've done promos against me from him.
Yes, exactly. I just updated it to fit the story that we were in.
So,
Paul Heyman, we talked about like Bobby Heenan, like as far as like you could put him anywhere on your screen and he was that valuable. Paul Heyman the same way.
Yep.
Right? Whether it was a manager, a commentator, even booking the shows, running a promotion, like he did so much to contribute to the business, and he's still contributing to the business.
Yeah.
I kind of think, like, out of all the people like DCW brings in for like seminars or whatnot like that, if they brought in Paul Heyman somehow, I would sign up for that. I don't care if I'm in the business or not at the time. I am signing up to I could listen to Paul Heyman talk for 2 full days, 5 full days. Like, and he'd have so much knowledge to pass down. Not he could talk on promos for probably 2 full days, and then he could talk on booking matches, and he could talk about, heels, and he could psychology, like you name it, you could learn
You can learn
anything
anything.
you want to know to be a wrestler from Paul Heyman, and yet he never wrestled.
Well, I was
He
going to
was
say,
never a wrestler.
you can learn anything that you wanted to from Paul Heyman, except for how to do the moves.
Right.
And to be honest, in wrestling, doing the moves is like 10% of
I was
being
going
a
to say,
wrestler.
and doing the moves, that's probably the least important part of wrestling,
It's true.
right? And if you don't believe me, to those that are listening, look at a Hulk Hogan or The Rock or or
Bret Hart. 5
Hey,
moves of
now.
doom, brother. 5 moves of doom.
Hey, Brett had way more. He okay.
John Cena's
That
also on
kinda-
that list too.
Yeah, John Cena for sure. Brett could work. Brett had moves. Yes, he used the same, but
Hogan could work too.
he just didn't need to, right?
Yeah, he didn't
that
need
wasn't
to.
his.
Yeah.
He didn't need to, do a 450. Now that I don't know if he could do, but he didn't need to try.
I bet you if you asked him, he could tell you he could do one. Like, back
Sure.
in the day, brother, before my knees and my back, I could do a 450, no problem.
I could do a 450, and then I'd pick up the 1,000-pound Andre the Giant in front of 2 million people at the Superdome, and whatever. And then and then Andre died the very next day after I beat him at WrestleMania 3.
Yeah, it wasn't like almost a decade later.
Right, exactly. If you listen to some of Hogan's stories, it's hilarious. But yeah, I mean, Paul Heyman, that's probably, we could list so many other managers, right? I mean, just real quick, Classy Freddie Blassie, Captain Lou Albano, all great old school managers and whatnot. But Paul
and
Heyman,
the best Mario too.
I 100% agree. I loved the Super Mario Brothers show that he was.
It was Captain Lou Albano.
I watched that every day. By the way, I watched all of those, and I loved that, and they paired it with Legend of Zelda, the cartoon that came with it. I loved that. I used to be able to sing the Super Mario song, but from the show, but. And he was in Girls Just Want to Have Fun, the music video for Cyndi Lauper. And honestly, Captain Lou had a lot to do with the rock and wrestling connection. That whole boom in the 80s with Hogan and Piper and Mr. T and all that. He had a lot to do with that, actually. Yeah. But Paul Heyman's probably as good of a manager as any to end on, I think, just because, I honestly think he may have. It's a debate, honestly, whether who was the greatest of all time, him or Bobby Heenan. Because the only thing that I'd give Heenan a nod over is that he could work. He could take bumps, right? And Paul Heyman really can't do that. But Paul Heyman also ran a wrestling company, and he was on a creative team. Bobby Heenan might have contributed ideas too at some point, but that wasn't his forte.
No.
So,
and not just booked a promotion, like he booked the third best promotion at the time in the world, essentially, for a good chunk of the 90s.
Mm-hmm. And then he was on the creative team for one of the hottest periods in WWF too. Yeah. He had the SmackDown 6, where he was booking for SmackDown, and he had Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, Edge, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero. You had, now granted, that could be like kind of saying how Phil Jackson was with Kobe Bryant and with Michael Jordan, right? He had the talent in place. Same thing with I guess Vince Russo booking the Attitude Era. I mean, you had The Rock, you had Stone Cold Steve Austin, you had Mick Foley, right? So you had all of these personalities there. So I think it takes both, though.
I mean, look at WCW. WCW had a ton of talent, but no guiding, right? So, and how well they worked. All that being said, guys, let us know what you guys think. Who is the greatest manager of all time? Is it Paul Heyman? Is it Bobby Heenan? Is it somebody we didn't talk about? let us know. Hit us up on social medias, Be Hero Media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find us at BeHeroMedia.com for everything that is Be Hero Media. You can also reach out to me directly at Mike Burke, DCW on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can hit me up on Twitter at Facebook, or hit me up on Twitter at Mike Burke Bro. You can also hit the good doctor here, Psycho, at Psycho Wrestling on Facebook. Sorry, jumped into my other podcast for a hot second. All right. And then last before we leave, guys, we have a lot of great stuff coming up for Devotion Championship Wrestling on August 11th. So just a few days from now, about 2.5 weeks, we will be doing the Wild Wild West Festival in Salt Lake City. And then the following weekend, August 19th, we will be at Light Tree Studios for Back in Session. Should be a great show. There's going to be a lot of good stuff going on with that one. And then the following weekend, August 26th, we'll be up at Tussle Time for Tussle Time 7. And then September 16th, we will be having DCW Control, where we'll be having EC3, Chris Adonis, both there, as well as that same day, we will be doing a seminar for any worker or wannabe worker or any person in the business wanting to come and learn from EC3, former WWE, Impact, talent. So there's a great opportunity to go and learn from a really good worker if you want to. So find us on Facebook at Devotion Championship Wrestling or DCW Salt Lake City on Twitter to get your tickets for all of those events and sign up for the seminar. All right. Well, I think that is it, Psycho. As we're ending this, I wanted to let you know, as I'm getting towards the end of my wrestling portion of my career, I do think I will be moving on to being a manager. I think that is what I'll end up going with. It just kind of fits with who I am now. And I'm excited for it. So
it's a lot of fun.
I've learned a lot from these guys. Of course, I guess I learned from you. But guys, I hope you guys enjoy it. And I hope to see you guys at the next several Devotion Championship Wrestling shows. But for the rest of Be Hero Presents, I am Brian, he is Psycho, and that's us tapping out. Have a good night, guys.